Hi, everybody. Nice to see you here. Thank you for coming along to my talk today. My name is Amy, and I'm going to talk to you about my experience in growing a women in technology community in the East Midlands in Nottingham, the city that I'm from, and where I'm a campus expert at the University of Nottingham. So, who am I? As I said, I'm Amy Dickens. My Twitter handle is @RedRocksProjects. My GitHub handle is @DickensA, and you can get my website there. I'm a PhD student at the University of Nottingham, and for the last few years, I have been running the Women in Technology conference at Nottingham and helping the women in tech community grow there. So actually, I had a really unusual route into technology myself. So I was actually a musician, and then I did a degree in audio and recording technologies, which kind of led me to a weird, wonderful place of being a creative and a technologist and finding that there's this term creative technologist that apparently you can use on your CV. So I then moved to being a sound engineer, and I've been running events really since around 2010 when I first started out. And in 2012, I was actually the stage manager for a huge event for Nottingham Gay Pride. And yeah, I've kind of been used to stages. So taking to the Women in Tech conference arena wasn't something that was a bit of a surprise for me. But actually showing people how to get into tech is something I'm really an advocate for. So at the minute, I'm actually doing a PhD in computer science. And my thesis is in gesture-controlled sound for users with complex disabilities. Sounds like a big mouthful, but I help people access music technology by using sensors and controllers to give that access to people who have complex disabilities and otherwise wouldn't be able to perform. So an example of my work is the Able Orchestra. We performed at the BBC Proms last year, and if you go through my website and Twitter, you'll be able to find some information about that. If you're interested in talking to me about it, please do come and speak to me at the end. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is why do we need women in tech communities? Why do they matter? How do you grow communities like that? And how do you be welcoming to everybody? And 5 simple things that you can do for your communities to make them more inclusive and to make sure that you're welcoming everybody. So why women in tech? There is a lot of debate about women in tech events. Some people like that they're branded as women in tech events. They feel like it makes it more accessible. And actually, other people have an issue with this whole branding just for one gender. Now, to actually understand why it's important to have women in tech events, we actually need to talk about bias. So when we think about bias, we think about this word, all of the time we're used to hearing negative bias. This creates discrimination, it creates environments that have a negative impact on people and communities. But we also have positive bias. And positive bias can happen where you see somebody else doing something that you'd like to do, and they have the same culture as you, or they follow the same interests as you, and connecting with that person makes you believe that you can go there too, and you can do that, and you can achieve that because you have this positive affirmation with that character. And positive bias can lead to negative environments too. It can lead to us only thinking of one person because we're so used to that community and expecting that person there. But it also has this great way of showing people through a door into technology careers who normally wouldn't access it because they might feel that they're out of place. So it's something that we need to be aware of. And we need to be aware of it because technology has no bias, actually. When we start out with code, our code cannot be biased. It's just code, right? But we do. And when we have biases, we can create cultures that inherit those. We can create code that inherits that. And there's cases of AIs that we've seen through history. There's some very funny examples, actually, and just outrageous that they've inherited these biases and people just have assumed that it would be fine. And then it gets down the line and it causes problems. So you might think you don't have bias, but actually there's something called unconscious bias. Unconscious bias is bias that's been created by being involved in a culture, by being around us. If we're in an environment where we see predominantly the same other person, we will make assumptions based on that. And we can just inherit these unconsciously, and we take that into our culture, and it can make us overlook things that we do in our communities. So we might think what we've done isn't a problem because, you know, my friend Bill here doesn't care that I've done that. But somebody else who you might encounter in your day-to-day activity might find that offensive some way or make them feel out of place, or it might cause a problem. So we just need to be really aware of our own biases. And now I'm going to bring up another buzzword, which is diversity. And the reason that we need to think about biases is because diversity is a big thing in the industry right now, that we're trying to work towards more diverse communities and teams and cultures. But diversity isn't just a gender, a race, a culture. Actually, I think Terry Burns' Twitter was at CodeMotion last week, and I think she put it really, really well. Diversity is about teams, companies, thoughts, backgrounds, music tastes. It's everything that makes up a person's personality. To have a diverse team doesn't mean just to have a mixed race team or a mixed gender team or this or that. It's not tick boxing. It's about having different people with different attitudes who will think differently to you, so that when things pass through your team, you have a fair input from all different representations. So diversity is really important. And for women in tech, diversity isn't quite a thing yet. If we look at the facts and the figures, there are lots of reports out there. Loads of people have published reports at the minute. It's a bit of a hot topic amongst people trying to show that they have this diversity culture. And when you drill down into technical roles, 20% is where women fit in. So there is less than 20% of technical roles, when you drill down into the tech industry, are women. And that's still a huge, huge gap. And whilst we'd like to see that improve, it's doing it very slowly, and even it's having an impact at course level. I am a PhD student at the university. I'm part of our diversity group, and this last year we actually saw a slight decline in numbers taking up computer science degrees, taking up STEM careers. So it does have an impact. And when we think about that, we need to brand and push things as women in tech so that we can play this part of affirming positive discrimination for role models. So actually, I'd really like to see it step towards removing gender labels from job roles altogether. Because by showcasing women who absolutely own it in technical roles, we show the younger, the older, anybody that there are role models that exist that they can relate to. And there shouldn't be this gender labeling, but I think we're a bit too far in the future now of looking at an industry, if it can't recognize binary gender roles, even though gender should be considered as something completely fluid, because it is. We're a little bit way off there, so we need to improve this to be able to make that community more welcoming. So at Women in Tech in Nottingham, which is the conference that I run, we aim to inspire. So our goal is to inspire anybody to take up technology as a career or a hobby, or just to learn a little bit more about the subject. So we designed a conference event that was designed to provide less techie people with a sort of window into technology careers in the industry and what people do and what skills you can acquire through it. So we had talks from inspirational women throughout the industry and accessible workshops that offered an introduction to different subjects. So from learning how to use Git to learning how to code in Python for the first time, or actually some Arduino or Raspberry Pi or some hands-on skills. We even had soldering stations and all sorts, and games areas. It was a kind of day just to celebrate the things that you can do with technology and show people it's actually not as scary as it might first seem to take that first step. So our timeline looks a bit like this. In November 2014, we had the first Women in Tech conference at the University of Nottingham. In February 2016, I took over and we had our second Women in Tech conference, which grew in size. It went from about 80 to 200 people. In March 2016, we actually saw the setup of a monthly meetup by another group of women inspired in our community to start meeting up as a monthly event and have talks and breakouts and try and show people that there was somewhere that they could go for this community. We then saw the third Women in Tech conference happen in February of this year, which I'm pleased to report had like 250 people attend. And then we had the first birthday for the meetup. And right now, on the horizon, we're building a community outside of the conference, outside of the meetup, and it's moving forward as its own entity. So actually, it's doing really well. But How can you do this? How can you create events for everyone? It's a difficult thing. When you're branding something as women in tech, you do have to be careful that you're making sure your wording is that it is still gender inclusive. Don't try and say to people, oh, it's only for women, or like when people assume that, challenge them and say, actually, so it's for everybody. It's just making people aware that there is that gender gap in the industry. So really, we're saying it's for all genders, all levels, all ages, and all interests. It's really important to get this right so that you can have impact on your community. And what happens when you have impact on the community is the ripple effect. You affect one person, that positive message spreads, and it ripples out into your community, and that gets more people involved and more positive messages, and that's fantastic. And when you see that spread from an event, it's really, really humbling. I want to show you an example. This was a drawing. I'm sorry about the size and scale, it's not very good, but an 8-year-old attended our last Women in Tech conference. We have it open to all ages, we have it open to all genders, we encourage anybody to come along to this conference. And she drew this picture of a Women in Tech superhero. And she put, today I've learned that I can be successful in technology if I want to be. And that message was so, so strong, because we need to, when we say we're removing gender from job roles, we need to show people that they can excel in whatever they want to be, regardless of who they are. Who you are as a person doesn't make up what you can achieve, and that should be the message that goes out to people. So we need to really just encourage and support each other. After all, we're all human, and we shouldn't be afraid to show that. I find being competitive is so, so hard and so, so draining and lonely, and it just fuels insecurity. And actually, yes, competition is good sometimes in industry and other things, but what really matters when you're trying to build things like this, it's not whether you have the best women in tech event or the best this event or the best whatever you want to brand. It's about being in the community. And when you feel, when you compare it with competition, it feels like a warm hug, because you have just people around you that want to support you and are striving together in the same space. So a few examples of this in the UK from places that have branches in the UK and across the world. We have Non-Binary in Tech, which is coming up at Goldsmiths. We have Code Liberation. Modern Muse, which is a platform for women around the world to show their profiles and show what careers they do. We have Rails Girls, who open day-long courses for Ruby on Rails, and it's a great gathering of loads of women being mentored by all people from the industry, and that's really cool. And She++ and Transcode. And I've talked to all of these people, all of these groups, and we're building communities around events and sharing contacts with each other and getting people involved, because it's really about creating ambassadors. So when you create a community like this, you want to create an ambassador, like a brand ambassador, but when it's a community, they show you their support for you publicly. And they can help promote your messages and support you when you really need it. So in Women in Tech, for instance, there are some not so great things that can happen. It doesn't happen often, and I'm very glad of that, but there are things where people might say things that are out of turn or disagree with the message that you're trying to promote. And I implore you, please, if you're part of a community and you know what that message is and you know it's inclusive and you hear somebody slating it for whatever reason, be sure to challenge their negative behavior, because don't just ignore them, because then it can just go on. And it's not that we want to eject people who don't agree with us. That's not the point, but what we're trying to do is have an impact on those uninformed voices. And you can start doing that by just telling them something's not cool, and it's not welcome in that space, and that you can help them understand a subject if they're not sure. But realistically, sometimes it's just about making sure that people understand our communities and what they're about. So as an example of this, I heard the following about an all-women team at a hackathon this year. They won prizes, and there was a comment from the audience, they only won it because they're women. That is unacceptable. People in the community pulled this person up, and I'm so glad that they did, but it's comments like this that can have an impact on that impose self-doubt that people have. And that could make those people never walk into a tech event again, because it's not the impact that it has on that person individually with that event, but that person with the whole industry. You're representing everything when you have a tech event. You're representing a community that they're accessing for the first time. And if their first experience is negative, that could be the only experience they ever have with you. So bear that in mind when you're using language, when you're presenting things to people. These things can have a huge effect on the wider community. So what does the future look like for women in tech? Well, for my community right now, I mentioned it's kind of super exciting. We've got some pretty awesome things on the horizon, and the conference and meetup are moving together. So we're actually going to be more of a community organization, and we're actually receiving support from our friends at Nottingham for this. And I'm very lucky, very, very lucky to have a great hub of tech folks in Nottingham that are really, really supportive. And they've been super helpful and willing to lend a hand to me, from being just the student-run conference to out in the community to supporting everything right now. In fact, I think they're live streaming this talk right now of me. And it's always nice to hear that from afar, like be encouraging and supporting. So for me, the sooner we can see a representation for all gender identities across the tech industry, the better. But that's because we don't all fit into a checkbox. We're diverse, we're unique by nature, and that needs to be reflected in our industry. So what can you do to make sure that your events encourage this and recognize this? So a lot of people might have seen name badges at tech conferences that have an optional pronoun section. Some people like this, some people don't like this, but if it's an optional pronoun thing that you can use, so have a reference point where somebody can choose whether you want to be referred to as he, she, or them, it makes a difference, and it can open up to a community to make sure that, some people might want to have that representation there, they might not, and it's a completely optional thing. It's not hard to do on a name badge. Having gender-neutral toilet facilities, it's something that they've done here. It's something that is a little bit of a struggle in the UK, I'm not going to lie, because the way our buildings are designed aren't always friendly towards this. But even if it's just 1 or 2 facilities around your event, being able to point that out to people and be like, yeah, that's something we thought about, and we're trying to think of everybody, so let's make sure that can happen. And make sure people, as I said before, know that your event is inclusive. So use language like, we are a gender-inclusive event, we are an inclusive event. Make sure that that message gets home, because especially if you're a community like women in tech, people make assumptions based on a name. The name has to stick because it's what it's about. Otherwise, you can dilute the message, but what you're trying to say is, in everything that goes around your advertising, everything else, make sure it says inclusivity is the key goal here. And another thing that's an easy switch is improve your language. Something that's really simple to do is switch to hey folks. There's a lot of tech industry talks that I go to, and the first thing I hear is, hi guys, how are you today? It doesn't offend me personally, but it could make somebody else feel in the room that doesn't identify with them. But it's something that's quite common, and hi guys is used across the world, and I've been to events, all countries, where that's the first thing I hear is hi guys. Hey folks is just one word switch, and it sounds initially a bit funny, but you get used to it, and it includes everybody. And I think, who's going to argue if all they have to do is change a word to make sure everybody's included? What's the argument against that? So I'm going to give you 5 actionable points that you can take away with you today. And the first of these is be aware of your own biases. Now, if you haven't ever seen these testing that you can do, it's called implicit association testing. It's actually a program that's run for free by Harvard, and you can go online, take implicit association tests, and that will actually tell you whether there is some level of unconscious bias. Now, it has been tested thoroughly to see whether there is any weighting or any chance for it to operate biases in a different way, but that actually tells you a little bit about yourself and what your biases might be. Encourage inclusivity. If you can, if you know that you can make a simple language change to make that happen, that you can promote events in your area and create an open community. Do those things to encourage the inclusivity for your area. Also, for inclusivity, a point that I come across as well when it comes to language is being mindful of terms like basically, or you simply do this. When you're speaking to people, a large audience like this, where there's a wide technical knowledge, you don't know what somebody's basically is or simply is. My simply could be your string theory, and vice versa. So you have to be really careful in communities that you're not isolating somebody and making them feel stupid in a room because you're calling something basic that they don't even understand. We get this a lot with acronyms and other things as well. And you know, my dad sees GitHub and laughs at the word Git. So it's one of those things that happens across the board. People might not understand what it's about. And you should really avoid assuming knowledge levels if you can, unless you really know your audience, and then you can go full tech on them. Another point is to be an ambassador. I think it's really important to do as much as you can for this stuff. If you don't belong to one of these communities, but you're an advocate for them, that's really important. It's a really important role because it reaches out to outside of this community. I love it when I see a large representation of different cultures and different genders at my events, because that means that, you know, I'm not just preaching to the converted. I'm preaching to people who are going to take that message out and go, yeah, actually, women in tech, they did this really cool thing, or you should go to the next one, and you should be an ambassador for this, or you should recommend this to your friends who are women and trying to get into tech. And that's what spreads your audience. And definitely, definitely challenge negative behavior. We don't like confrontation. That's not something that I'm advocating here. I'm not saying go up and be in somebody's face. I'm just saying don't let someone's last negative experience with a person in your community be the only ever experience they have with that community. Please do things that you can, even if it's just saying, hey, that's not cool, or having a code of conduct and making sure everybody's aware of it. Do the things that you can to make sure that negative behavior doesn't stick in your community and doesn't become a thing that is encouraged. And we like Bill and Ted quotes in Women in Tech in Nottingham, and yeah, Jess wouldn't forgive me if I didn't include one, so be excellent to each other always. This is our motto at Women in Tech, and it's actually on our stickers. Unfortunately, I don't have them with me today, but yeah, we have stickers with be excellent to one another on. It's on all of our branding, and it's something that I believe completely. It's so important to have a mantra like this because we're all human and we always want to be nice to one another. So thank you for listening. I'm Redbox Projects. Please come and talk to me afterwards if you want to talk about communities. Thank you.